Break is over and we are officially back and getting ready for a race weekend, Tim Rainey.
Yeah, I'm all recharged and ready to go, man.
Yeah, I mean,
batteries
listen,
recharged and all that crap. Everything.
It was nice to say. It was nice to see because silly season was distinctly unsilly this year. So there wasn't like any emergency pods that needed to be done or anything. It was like, oh, everybody's just going on vacation and we're going to stay that way.
Yeah, good point, Adam. But when we taped that podcast, so it would be the last week before the full summer shutdown. So before they had 2 full weeks off. So it would have been Spa, and then we had a week where we had like a bunch of news, and it was just all coming at once every single day. Sometimes 2 big stories a day, and then once that 2-week shutdown happens, like teams just forget about it. They're gone. They're not checking their phones. They're not doing anything. It's definite full shutdown mode at that point.
Well, it's a beautiful thing. I'm very grateful and very excited to be back. We're going to go to the Netherlands this weekend. Zandvoort, one of the fastest. I think it's a fun track. I always really love the embankment part of it. I think it's very, very cool. I love everything about this circuit. So it's your typical summer circuit. That's awesome. Usually the European circuits through the summer are just the absolute best racing to watch. But before we get to all that, Tim, I think there's a couple of things that we probably should talk about, is number one.
Before we get started, I got to ask you, what did you do on your summer break?
If you'd like to really know, I got really sick.
What?
I got so sick. So my wife's only vacation week this year was last week. We had a bunch of stuff planned. And I went down on Monday, and like she made this amazing steak dinner. Like she's really, really a great cook. And after I ate it, and this is like 7:00, 7:30, something like that, I'm like, I have to go to sleep. I'm feeling terrible. And then I didn't get out of bed on the Tuesday. The Wednesday I could get up, but I was sweating profusely, and just it was less of the nasal thing. I'm sure you can still hear the nasal, but a lot more of the aches and the pains and stuff. And then on Thursday, as I'm starting to round the corner a little bit, she gets it. And as of today, she is only now starting to get over it. So it was just it was a bit of a waste, Tim. I'm not going to lie. But I did get a lot of rest. I rested.
So disappointing.
Lame. I know. It's so freaking lame. What about you? What did you do?
Man, I did a lot. Went to some concerts.
What shows?
Well, I went and saw AWOL Nation. Do you know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Absolutely know who they are.
Another band called 311. I don't know if you've ever heard of
Absolutely. Do I know 311? Come on.
Okay. Yeah, they're a great band. I grew up listening to them, so it was great to go and see them live. You know, it's funny, man. You know how you go and you see like bands that you grew up with listening to, like you're in your teens and they're obviously in their late 20s, getting into their 30s. And then when you get into your 30s and 40s, they're in their like 50s.
Yes.
And you're thinking like, I know what it feels like to be 40. I don't know what it feels like to be 50. And I imagine it feels a lot worse, but then you go and you show up and these guys just look great. They look like they got a ton of energy. Like, they're really fit. They've been taking care of themselves, like all of these musicians. And you're just like, how?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I remember when Fleetwood Mac did a full reunion tour, like Christy McVie came back and that's when she was still alive. And she called Stevie Nicks and she said, okay, I think I'm ready to get back on the road. And Stevie's like, that's awesome. Get a trainer. And so a lot of those guys, they work out, they'll like train in the morning and then practice in the afternoon to get ready. Cause those stage shows can be really, really intense. Like I went and saw Iron Maiden a few summers ago and I couldn't believe these guys are in their late 60s, early 70s, and they're flying, swinging guitars around and stuff. I'm like, I don't know how they're doing that because I'd be exhausted.
Oh, yeah. And like, think about how easy it is for them to like get injured on the stage. Like I remember, like, I think it was Zach De La Roche from Rage Against the Machine. Like we went and saw them when he broke his ankle.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was Chicago. Like I want to say it was 2 years ago now. They had held a concert here in Toronto at the Scotiabank Center. And he had broken his ankle, like, I think it was 2 concerts just before they had gotten here. Oh. So he had to do the whole thing sitting down because his friggin' foot was toast. but he did that from like jumping around on the stage and stuff. So it's like,
oh yeah,
you know, like I appreciate when musicians like get into their act and stuff, but like sometimes the older they get, I kind of just waiting for like, oh dude, don't pull a muscle, you know? Like,
yeah. David Lee Roth wrote a book in the mid 2000s, like early 2000s, and he said the opener of it was, and he was the lead singer of Van Halen for a long time, known for doing backflips and kicks and all that sort of stuff on stage. He was a gymnast, and he said, I'm hurt every tour and I'm hurt every show. He said, every show I'm in pain.
Wow.
And, I think that says something, right? There's so much athletic prowess that goes into it. Yeah. And it's interesting, we always talk about what F1 drivers like lose or race car drivers in general, what they lose throughout a race in weight. And I always wonder that with musicians too. You're doing like Taylor Swift's show in Europe, 3.5 hours, Tim. You're losing weight. You're for sure losing weight.
100%. Like it's a physical activity, right? And you're definitely going to be sweating. Like every concert that I've gone to, every musician has gotten sweaty and everything. Like it happens, right? I mean, it's a physical. They got to put on a performance.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And that's part of the performance. And like whatever comes from it, right? So, but yeah, no, definitely, man. What else did we do? Took my dad to the Jays game.
Oh
hadn't been to a baseball game in like quite a while because like. There's nothing wrong with baseball. Sometimes I find it a little slow, let's say. But yeah, so we went there. My girlfriend and I took him to a game. Then we took my family to the F1 exhibition, which was great. Hadn't been together with my whole family in like a while because since probably I want to say like Christmas time, like I've been so busy traveling everywhere and with Formula One and everything that we never had a chance to all be together. So F1 exhibition hooked me up on that front and got us all together and gave us like the full tour and stuff. So it was fantastic. I had a lot of fun. And other than that, man, just rode my bike, swam, ran, went to Ottawa for a wedding. That was it. Took it easy. Recharged the batteries. Nothing too crazy. Went to the movies, that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, that's good. Did you see Deadpool and Wolverine yet?
I did. I went and saw it.
How is it?
It was good, man. I liked it. I enjoyed it. Like, look, I mean, I think it was kind of like growing up as a kid. You're watching like Saturday morning cartoons. X-Men. And Spider-Man was on right after that and everything. And this movie was kind of just like everyone's costume was legit. It was all like very, it was all comic accurate in a sense. But it was kind of like you just took your toys and smashed them together. That's basically what it was like. It was awesome. I love that.
That's very cool.
You just switch your brain off, right? It's not like I didn't have to think too hard,
No, and that you don't go to movies like that to think. I often say that I don't often want to watch a movie that makes me think because I have to think so much in real life that I'd prefer to just shut it off. So
we got into season 3 of The Bear. So I got into season 1 like years ago, like when it first came out, and like I loved it. It was a great show. And then season 3, so that one's been a little more. I've had to like think. Like, oh, why did they play this music here? Or why did they do this shot? Every shot is like really tight now, and you can just see everyone's facial expressions, which is great. It's great acting, the whole performances, but it feels a lot more artistic than the seasons before it. But I don't want to ruin anything for anybody who hasn't seen it. But yeah, we've spent some time watching that show too. So.
If you're relaxed and you want to stay relaxed, don't watch The Bear.
Oh yeah, good point. Yeah, very good point. Yeah, that's actually a really good point.
So Tim, we were talking a little bit about sweat and weight loss, and one of the stories that's been kind of bubbling under the surface that you might have actually forgotten about because life gets in the way is remember when George Russell won Spa but then he didn't, and there was weight loss factor associated, and they initially blamed it on the tires. Well, Pirelli came out and said, well, I mean, it could be, but it's not. It doesn't account for the 1.5 kilograms that they were underweight. And it's interesting because Mercedes came out and talked about this a little bit, and it's much more than just that. It was the floor and potentially George Russell's weight loss throughout the race because it was a hot race.
Yeah, I think a big part of it was not only it was a combination of a few different things. One of them being the tire, another being the plank. So the floor, like underneath the car, the more it goes up through Eau Rouge, like there's a lot of bottoming and grounding that's happening there, so the car compresses into the asphalt and into the track, and it wears away that plank that's underneath. So there's that, and then also George had lost like quite a bit of weight. I think they the team wasn't expecting him to lose as much weight as he did.
Mm-hmm.
And that was also a key contributor to the amount of weight that had the 1.5 kilograms that they were looking for. Part of it was George as well. So just such a hot day, and they didn't take into consideration the sweat loss, how much he was going to sweat, how much weight was he going to lose. There's such a science to the whole thing, right, Adam?
Sure.
That it's like the teams really have to dig in and prepare properly as to where weight is coming off. And I think it just shows you how specific Formula One is with everything, right, Adam? Like, even when you factor in weight loss, the teams have to do those factors, day before, a couple days before, so they can be prepared to make sure that the car is at the proper weight limit. So there's so many different things that go into that as well, right? So
it is a detail-oriented sport. Yeah. And as somebody who's not very detail-oriented, I respect it. But I I can't imagine the minute, detailed spreadsheets that those guys have. Something else that I think is really interesting, and we've seen this with other drivers before. I'm thinking specifically of Alex Albon and his shoulders being cut by his ill-fitting harness. Oscar Piastri had a broken rib because of an ill-fitted F1 seat in his McLaren, which I thought, Tim, that, because I can understand Williams not having it together necessarily on Albon's part, just because they had some parts issues and tub issues that are well documented earlier in the year, and they have issues turning things out of the factory because they're switching things over from, Excel sheets to real thing. Long story short, how is it that McLaren has an ill-fitting seat for Oscar Piastri?
A lot of it comes down to like seat fit. So when you start the season, or just before you start the season, you're getting fit to the tub that you'll be competing in for the season. The tubs don't normally change simply because of the cost cap. So you're building one tub that'll essentially be remanufactured throughout the season, and you do your seat fit in the wintertime. So probably in around like December or January, Oscar's probably doing his seat fit, and it takes a while to get the proper fitting at him, because even in testing, you're trimming parts of it away to try and feel like you're comfortable, and not comfortable. It's never comfortable, but to feel like you're secure and you're not like moving around. Like, even moving just like a couple inches here or there, it is magnified when you're pulling like 6 Gs, 5 Gs laterally in a corner. It's just all of it, right? Because your whole body is shifting from all of that weight being sent through your body. And if the tracks are very fast and punishing, and let's say you get a couple of those back to back to back, right, then you start to run into these problems of like, like my hip is like really acting up, or my lower back is killing me, or whatever. Sometimes it's the seat that's just not secured you enough, and so you need to go back and remake another one so you can get that perfect fit, so you can at least feel like your body's not moving around too much. For Oscar, in his case, there's a pinch point in the seat, and having the last 3 races, which were, very before Spa, were very physical and fast and very demanding, and that right there is enough for you to break a rib because of all of the forces going through you for, let's say, 3 Grand Prix, back to back to back. That's a lot. It is a ton of stuff going on there, and so that's what led to a broken rib.
It's so interesting hearing his timeline to support what you're saying here, Tim, because he said the scan was the day after Silverstone, but it was definitely broken before Silverstone. Yeah. And he said it probably got disturbed a bit in Barcelona, and then with Austria right afterwards, it was pretty painful and nasty for a few days. Now, I want to run through his results, because if you look at the Spanish Grand Prix, where he says the pain started, although he doesn't know that the break happened there, he finished 7th. But then you go to the Austrian Grand Prix, and this is where he thinks he broke it. He finished 2nd. And then you go to the British Grand Prix, where he still has not even had a scan yet to confirm that it's broken. He finishes 4th. And then the Hungarian Grand Prix, he wins. And the Belgian Grand Prix, he finishes 2nd right before the break all with a broken rib. Now, I've never broken a bone. I've been really lucky. I hear if you're going to break something, broken ribs are not fun at all.
The worst.
So you've broken ribs.
Oh, yeah. Go-karts. Yeah.
Go-karts.
Yeah.
What's it feel like?
Oh, man. It feels like exactly what it sounds like. It's just like a little bone, a little chicken bone just goes like that. Oh. It absolutely kills. And it hurts even more because when you get back into a car, go-kart, whatever, those same forces aren't going anywhere.
Right.
And if the track is even more aggressive, so those are some pretty aggressive tracks that he had gone to there. I would assume, and this is just an assumption, but what I would have done is I probably would have gotten some sort of like a numbing agent on there, or like an injection of some kind to try and keep the pain down a bit, just something that would allow me to focus, because once you get, tired, injured in a race car, whatever, as soon as that happens, you obviously have nerve centers and everything, but your mind goes where it is. Like, it's not like going to the track. It's you literally can feel things when you're getting shifted somewhere. You're like, oh, like, there it is. But you're supposed to be focused on the track and what's coming up next and whatever. So, man, those are some pretty impressive results. Like, it's amazing. That's tough. That's tough. Yeah. That's just a tough dude right there.
It's a tough dude right there. I think you're absolutely right. Tim, it's been that part of it for me is what makes those results even more impressive, is you do that with a broken rib. And the thing is that we didn't hear about it. Sometimes you hear about those things with drivers, and I think with Oscar, he's so understated. And here's what he had to say. This is what I love about Oscar. He so doesn't want to talk about it. He said, you make the seat, obviously, at the start of the year, and sometimes you get it a little bit wrong. He's like, some tracks don't expose it, but I think going from Barcelona to Austria to Silverstone, 3 pretty hardcore tracks did it. So, yeah, it was a bit of pressure, a bit of a pressure point, which eventually gave up. But it's all good now, and we've changed the seat and fixed it pretty much. So, yeah, back to normal. Like, that's it. Yeah, I broke a rib, won a race, came second in a couple others, top 4s, top 5s, no big deal. Like, that's I love this guy.
What a legend, eh?
Yes. Yeah. Now, I want to say this. It's been interesting because there was no silly season in the actual F1 paddock this year. Sergio Perez obviously staying where he was at Red Bull. Everybody thought if anything's going to happen, it's going to be him. Yeah. We still don't know totally who's in every seat for next year, but we're getting a better picture. And obviously Carlos Sainz is going to Williams. But what I found interesting was the fans got silly. Now, online, things can get a little toxic and get a little crazy. Oh, no. But there was a quote that I think is worth talking about that made the rounds, because when Lando Norris, I believe in 2021, was asked about Lewis Hamilton and about his accomplishment of 7 straight championships or whatever, and this is an interesting quote because Lando can be very dry. He said something to the effect of, "Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. He's got the best car." And so what was interesting about that is people are going, okay, Lando, you have the best car now. You have the best car, and you're still not winning. And, he did get his win. Absolutely. And he did give up another win to Oscar, which, could have been 2. But Tim, when you hear something like that, is that just a young driver 3 years ago probably spouting off and being immature? Because that's how it strikes me. Or is this a real learning lesson for Lando where it's like, oh, okay, yeah, and you actually still do have to win the race?
I would need to, first of all, I need to see the quote or hear what he said. What's the context? And who did he say it to? And what was the significance of it before, launching into a detailed, oriented opinion? In Formula One, there are teams that, they do get a dominant car, but that's on the driver to make sure that they take it to wins and do what they need to with it. I mean, some folks seem to think that, oh, yeah, he's got the best car and whatever, he's just going to go and win. That's great if you got the best car, but if you can't drive it and get the wins, it doesn't mean shit. You have to make sure, you know what I mean? So you have to make sure that you have the best driver driving the best car so they can go out, execute, and be dominant, right? It's like You're going to take the worst driver in the world, put them in the best car, and have them go out and be dominant. It's probably not going to happen. So it's like you need to have all of those certain things coming together. In McLaren's instance and Lando Norris, I mean, their car is really good, but it's not like dominant, right? Like it is a car that is a good all-arounder. It's not I mean, like take Spa for instance. If McLaren had a dominant car, like McLaren would have absolutely thrashed everybody in qualifying for the Belgian Grand Prix, and they didn't, right? Max was, even though he got the grid penalty because of the engine change, Max was in another dimension. Like, no one was catching him in qualifying. Like, he was incredible. So, I mean, I would say for this season, you know, Lando probably should have a few more wins. But I also think that the team has a responsibility in that as well, because they dropped the ball in a few of these races. Canada, by not just letting Lando do his own thing, and Pitt, if he thought a safety car was going to come out. Silverstone for sure. I mean, that should have been a victory. Like, putting him on soft tires instead of the medium, whatever. Austria, I think, also should have been another win. And then for Hungary, if he just gets a better start, that's a win there. So there's a combination of things, I think, for Lando and McLaren, but I wouldn't say that they have a dominant car. Yeah.
Okay. So here's what. So I like that you categorized it in that way, because Mercedes really did have, for a time, just an unbelievable car. Yeah. So here's what it was. It was back in 2020, and Lando was asked about
that car. Was awesome. Mercedes' car in 2020 was
crazy.
Lewis did what he did, right? Like, thrashed everybody. Like,
Hamilton broke the record for the most F1 wins, and Lando was asked about it, and he said, "It doesn't really mean anything to me. He's in a car that should win every race. Basically, he has one or two drivers to beat. That's it. Fair play to him. He's still doing the job he has to do." That's the quote that sort of took off. So I think
that's from 2020. People were bringing that quote up.
Oh yeah. Well, listen, they were bored.
That's so
long ago. I know. So, but I think it's important that we talk about that, because that became, for about a week, like, people were just dunking on Lando. And I think, first off, the 2020 Mercedes versus the 2024 McLaren, with regard to the rest of the field, are not comparable.
Oh,
right.
The 2020 Mercedes is probably one of the greatest race cars we've ever seen.
Right. So, like, and we've got four teams that can win a race any weekend this year, right? Red Bull, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren. So that was not the case in 2020. And I think, so that's key number one. And key number two, obviously, listen, I'm a McLaren fan, McLaren guy. I think Lando does put his foot in his mouth sometimes, but this one seems like, I feel like the guy was like, I don't know, 19?
Yeah, it's kind of that's kind of reaching. I would say, like,
I think so.
I mean, like, there was even like Adrian Newey, like, reports like going around that
100 million Aston Martin. Oh, you bet I have that on the docket. I'm bringing it up.
Oh man.
Well, let's talk about it.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
No truth to that.
I mean, Adrian Newey hasn't signed anything yet. Like,
okay,
he hasn't.
So maybe he's been offered it.
Yeah, and we're not going to know anything until September, mid-September probably, I would say. Could be even sooner.
Yeah.
Who's he going to sign with? Nobody knows. No one knows that. And even for the deals that I would say, like, Lawrence does, like, they're done very securely, and he doesn't give anything away. And so it's just folks online getting bored and saying stuff, and it's just like, there's no meaning to it. Adrian hasn't signed anything anywhere, and so let's just cool our jets here and wait and see what happens. I mean, he may not even return to Formula One, Adam. I doubt it. I
you think he'll be back?
That. I think he's going to be back. With which team though? Who knows? I mean, it doesn't sound like he's doesn't sound like he'll be going to Ferrari. I mean, could he go back to McLaren? Why not? Right? Like, why not pick up where you kind of left off from there? And then what about Aston Martin? For sure. I mean, if it's a good deal, if it makes sense, if it's something that he wants to do, if it's a project that he's interested in, then Yeah, for sure. That could be a place. But
I like.
there's lots of places you could go.
I love just for the nostalgia factor. I love the idea of a return to Williams or a return to McLaren.
Yeah.
But McLaren's interesting because it's the least talked about, right? All the other team principals have said, yeah, we'd love to have him. Yes. And we're talking to him and we want him here. And McLaren hasn't said anything. I'm sure they've chatted though.
Oh, I believe everybody's chatted to him. I wouldn't. You're not doing your job, right, Adam? If you're not going after this guy, like you're not. So if he's available, I mean, he's a free agent. You got to go get him, right? And he's the best free agent that's out there right now when it comes to making race cars. Technically, he's removed himself from the Red Bull Racing operation, so he's not involved in any capacity with what Red Bull Racing's doing. That's all falling on the shoulders of Pierre Vacher. But outside of that, I mean, if McLaren doesn't sign him, that's not a huge deal for them. Like, look at what they've done in the past 24 months. It's been remarkable. And that's with Andrea Stella retooling a few things, having them bring in a few outside guys, Rob Marshall in particular, who really stands out to me, and just retooling that engineering department and what they're doing down there. And they've just been incredible, man. Like, they brought one big upgrade this season, Adam, one. And then just tiny little parts from here on out. Just one big upgrade.
That's crazy.
Take a look at some of the other teams that are going on down the grid. It's like massive update. And then like 2 months later, massive update. And some of them aren't working for teams. And for McLaren, they launched one big one, and it's still, the car's still really good. Still competitive everywhere. Still good all arounder. From here on out, they've got to just bolt on little components that are going to help them eke out, hundreds here, hundreds there, etc. But
and perhaps focus on developing next year's car too.
Yeah,
right?
Do they really need Adrian Newey for all that?
I don't know. Yeah,
I mean, it sure wouldn't hurt. But
yeah, I hope he gets his office back though in the McLaren building. If he does go back, it's so funny when you read that book, because I read that at you told me to read that, so I read that over the winter, and it's a great book. But him talking about how Ron Dennis needed everything to be gray and black, gray and black, gray and black. And you know some like details that go even further than where Adrian goes in that book. But I think he painted his office a different color. Yeah. And Ron Dennis was like apoplectic about it. It's crazy. It's such a great story. He's the whole book is phenomenal. It's the best racing book ever. It's
I absolutely love that book. I recommended it to a friend of mine because he was asking like, what's the it was Bob Stern, who's basically like one of the reporters for Dallas Cowboys and all that kind of stuff. And he was like, what's the best racing book? And this is over the summer break. It's like racing book you've ever read. And I'm like, it has to be Adrian Newey's book, even though it's not a driver. It's still like, it's just so good on so many different levels. You don't need it to be a driver. You get so much just out of him. Yeah. And like drivers that he's actually worked with, and what he and engineers need to do to build a race car, his backstory, everything. I don't want to ruin it for people, but it's a great book. If you ever get a chance to read it, you should. It's fantastic.
I know everybody wants to hear about Senna and some of the other great drivers. But I love the Nigel Mansell stuff. And the politics at Williams with Frank, like Nigel Mansell, like winning and then going to IndyCar, and everybody's like, why'd he do that? And because they had already signed a new driver, and like there's just so much great stuff in there, great little tidbits here and there.
What do you say about Nigel's thighs or his ass? He had like a power ass or he had thighs or something.
He also, there's a great story, and I forget the guy's name, but he's talking about they had one great driver and one driver who was just a good F1 driver, but not going to win any races. And I think it was Nigel Mansell that was like messing with him and saying like, yeah, I've only eaten salads and I've gone vegan or something like that. And so this guy's like, well, I better do the same. And Nigel Mansell's like throwing back hamburgers and like
steaks and everything.
It's great. Trust me when I tell you this, and this is not a paid ad. Read that book. So obviously Adrian's still on the market now. Tim, going into Zandvoort, this is we're obviously past halfway. We're about 2/3, I'd say, through the season. What team? I'm going to say what team and then what driver. So we'll start with the team. What team is under the most pressure going into these last 10 races?
That has to be Red Bull, right, Adam? That has to be, right?
I think so.
I mean, maybe Sauber because they haven't even scored a point, but
yeah,
they started the season poorly and the car is poor, so it's
yeah.
I wouldn't say they're under a ton of pressure. I would say Red Bull Racing is for sure, and only for the Constructors Championship. Maybe not so much the Drivers Championship. If the next 3 races don't go according to plan for Verstappen and Lando's able to really capitalize on some misfortune, then we could probably start having that conversation. But I think after Spa, like, that conversation for me kind of started to die down a bit. But the Constructors is definitely not. I think there's 3 or 4 teams here that if they get hot at any point can blow this thing wide open, and we could see a new leader at the top of the Constructors standings by the time we get out of Monza. And I think that is possible. Heck, we could maybe able to see a new leader at the end of the Dutch Grand Prix here in the Constructors standings. So I think that for me, for Red Bull Racing, I think they are the ones who are under pressure for sure. And Max hasn't been totally happy with the car, its development, what they've done with that development over the last, 4 or 5 races. He is, we've heard it on the radio in some races as well. And I think for him, he is feeling that pressure. And I think if they can get more out of Sergio Perez, that's what's going to make the difference in this Constructors Championship, is what happens with Sergio, because we know Max is always going to be there. Like, he's it's not the Red Bull, the RB20 is not at this moment, Adam, it's not it's not like a real race winning car. I would say maybe Spa, it was a real race winning car, and that would be pretty much it. And you look at the amount of work that Max has to do to sort of fend off, 2 drivers from 2 different teams.
Yep.
It's not only like Lando Norris, Oscar Piastri. It's also George Russell. It's also Lewis Hamilton. And then some points it could be the Ferraris as well, like of Charles Leclerc and Carlos Sainz. And so I think for Max, he's got his work cut out for him, and definitely needs help from Sergio. So I think if the team's able to sort of bring Sergio around, then it may be hard for them to lose the constructor standings, but still, they got a lot of work to do there with Sergio for sure.
Yeah, and you know what? The door is still open for him potentially to be moved on from. The statement did leave that door somewhat open.
Yeah, maybe not for this season though. Like maybe for next, that's a for sure possibility. But once they locked in with him and committed to running him until the end of the season this year, he's not going anywhere. Maybe next year, but not for this season. It's too late at this point.
Right. Tim, I want to ask about Ferrari in this conversation as well, because they have obviously Lewis Hamilton coming in at the end of the year. They have a car that's been good and won, but not great. What kind of pressure are they under? What are their expectations for the second or for this part of the year?
What do you think? What?
I think it should be higher than what it is, right? Like,
sure.
I think they need to be going for at least second place. But difficult to steal that away from McLaren or Red Bull. But this is Ferrari. That should be absolutely on the table of, we need to do this. And their upgrades have not seemed to have the same punch that, for sure, McLaren, for sure, Mercedes, who've had the 2 best, I would say, upgrade packages this year. Red Bull's upgrades have not really gotten them where they need to go, but I think that they've gone as far as they can get with the car, or at least they're talking that way. Yeah. I'm curious about where Ferrari's at on that one.
They have to be in the mindset of getting ready for next year. I think a lot of teams are in that respect, when it comes to next season, because for next season, it's going to be awesome. It could possibly be, it could possibly be one of the greatest F1 seasons ever, with the way things are going right now. I would say for Ferrari, it's, learning from where you went wrong with the Imola update, which they appear to have learned that. What are the fixes moving forward, and are the fixes going to work?
Right.
Last season, we saw Ferrari sort of make the same mistakes, but really do well in rebounding and coming back stronger at the back half of the season. Could we see something similar here? I mean, we quite possibly could. I think the biggest thing is trying to get this car right for next year. It's crucial in that respect, because we don't know what's going to happen with 2026. And so I think if you can at least get the car into the ballpark of where you think it needs to be in that trajectory for 2025, I mean, that's what's going to be the most important thing, I think, for them, because of Lewis Hamilton and the investment that they've made in him and in that, and that has to be priority, I think, for them. Has to be.
And as far as drivers under pressure, who would you say is under the most pressure right now coming back in?
Daniel Ricciardo and Sergio Perez, but that would be, I would say, Daniel Ricciardo in terms of, can he continue the success that he's had in the last, I would say since Canada, right? Like I would say since Canada, he had a couple dips, but he was more consistent and consistently fast. If he can keep that going, and if Sergio doesn't really come together, I would be interested to see what they do there. I'd be interested to see if that's like they take Daniel and they put him into Red Bull Racing and they move on from Sergio if he continues to struggle.
Right.
And I think also under pressure is Verstappen. I think he is for sure. I think if at any point they start to have mistakes, issues with the car, and Lando starts to win a lot, outscore Max by quite a bit, I mean, he could find himself back into the drivers' championship chase here.
That would be huge.
Big ifs, right? Like everywhere, obviously.
Yeah, but I think there is some pressure on Lando.
But these are just little things that I'm looking at.
Absolutely. Now, this weekend, what kind of car do you need to have to be successful in Zandvoort?
Got to have a lot of downforce on it.
Okay.
For sure. I think like this is a track where you're going to be running max downforce. Big commitment corners, big commitment track. I think the more confidence you have within the car, the better you're going to do. And I think this should be a track where the RB20, so Red Bull Racing, does well, Adam. I really do. I think this should be a track where they, Max should be coming away with, his fourth straight win at his home Grand Prix and his 200th Grand Prix. Like this would be it. I think he should be coming away with the victory here, but I mean, let's wait and see. It's supposed to rain. It's really windy there today, apparently. That can throw a wrench into everybody's plans. I hope it rains. That'd be great. It would spice things up for us even more, right, Adam?
Absolutely. I like that. Love a Monday morning conversation about that.
Who do you think is under the most pressure, Adam?
Well, under pressure for me, I think Lando Norris is for the, to show that he can actually challenge Max. Because, a few races ago, we were talking about it like, okay, there's the new rivalry, right? Especially after what happened in Austria. And then a few races later, we're talking about Oscar way outperforming Lando in those last few races, which he did. And I think it's, I think it's great for Oscar, but I think Lando's got to show now. This is you've had 5-6 years to develop here. This is the time. Take it now. Take it now, because next year might be a real crapshoot for everybody. So you don't know where if you're gonna have another shot at this. It does so much of the time come down to the car. So I think there's that, and I think I do think McLaren are under an unbelievable amount of pressure to win the Constructors' Championship this year, because this is a team that hasn't done much since, Lewis Hamilton left. And that was a long, long time ago. So they've got to get that done. And then I think, drivers that, obviously that need to perform to stay in the sport, Ricardo and Sergio Perez are pretty obvious, right? Like that's an obvious one. I think that Daniel Ricciardo, if he continues things, works himself into the conversation for somebody. And it's just going to be a question of who. Helmut Marko said today that Liam Lawson will be in a Red Bull car next year. Yeah. Which team, it doesn't matter, but he will be racing Red Bull next year. So now the other thing I want to ask is which car lends itself to the downforce that Zandvoort needs? What team do you expect to be successful here?
Yeah, that should be the RB20, right? I mean, they
should be.
Yeah, it should be. I would say it kind of has to be them, just simply the way, because their car is built and the way it handles things. Mm-hmm. I think they would be mostly my favorite for this weekend. I think, Adam, and then McLaren I think would be second. And the interesting thing with Mercedes is we just never know with them right now, which I love, because it's great to see them back at the front of the field. Maybe not as strong, obviously, as they were in the past, but it's great to see them rebound from. Oh man, I remember just being in Bahrain and hanging around with the team and talking to people, and man, was it doom and gloom down there. It just wasn't a good atmosphere. It just they were down and out. They didn't understand what they had done wrong. Didn't really know how to fix things, and just kept at it. Never gave up, and found just some tiny details that helped them really bring the whole package to life. And then we saw them come to life in Canada, and it's like it's been fun to watch them every single weekend, because you just never know. Like they could look at Silverstone. Like, what a story! Right?
Yeah,
when Hamilton won, and obviously Russell was on pole. Like, just incredible stuff, right? Like, so I think Mercedes is always going to be one of those teams for the rest of the season. Now Adam is just going to be like, what are they going to do? Like, they could be that outlier every single weekend, which is exciting, right? Because it throws more into the story pot for us to sit here and chew up.
Oh, I'm excited for it. It's very cool. I mean, 4 teams with a shot at winning. I love that. Now, Tim, we got a lot of questions because it's been a while. So what, we had obviously shows over the break. I highly recommend you check out the Lawrence Barretto and Ben Hunt interviews if you haven't already, because Ben wrote a whole history of Red Bull. Lawrence was just awesome. Just what a fun, bright personality. Just really enjoyed him, and great stories. And I loved, his little anecdote about Lewis Hamilton, what he's like to talk to, what young Lewis Hamilton was like. Great guy. Really enjoyed that. So let's get into the questions, Tim.
From Dan Klubine, what should we expect from Williams Racing headed into the second half? Adam, I'll let you go first, and then I'll...
Well, here's the uneducated opinion. I want to see the Williams that I saw last year. I was really excited about the Williams I saw last year, at least with Alex Albon. Logan Sargent obviously is going to be out of the sport at the end of the year, but he's going to be into it probably Prema with IndyCar. He's a very good race driver. I'd like to see Alex Albon surprise the way he did last year. I know he's a great driver. I know that team is turning it around, and they're like the Titanic. It's really tough to turn, but I want to see some success there. I don't know whether it's possible, Tim. That's where I'm at. I just don't know. So you would have a better view on that.
The interesting thing for Williams is, like, are they going to really develop this car for the rest of the season, or are they going to start putting time, money, resources into next year's car, and then even more on top of all that, 2026?
Right.
Like, what is that, and what does it look like? Is this a season now where they just, I don't want to say give up, but not be as aggressive with as they probably could be? I think that for me is going to be interesting to see what they do, because obviously the season didn't start the way they wanted it to. They're late to the track on, pretty much everything with this car. And that has to do with what's going on behind the scenes at the factory, trying to get things turned around there. And so that's kind of put them on the back foot for this season. So my thoughts are, I think they're probably just going to take this season to just reset, get ready for next year, because you're going to have Carlos in there. You want to make a good impression and make sure that he's going to be happy right away when he gets there, and then push forward on that season. But with the goal to be 2026, to be that really big turnaround, that big jump you have in the constructor standings. So for me, that's going to be interesting to see what they do with the rest of the season. Louis asks, with the reports that Red Bull may be returning to an older spec car, at least in part to help Sergio Perez, how many races or practice sessions do you think that experiment lasts before they give up on that approach and the car for the season? What do you think, Adam?
That's a tough one to answer. You can only really answer that in theory, I think, Tim.
Yeah.
And in theory, I think that Red Bull are not patient, except for with Sergio, weirdly. They're not patient with anybody except for him. But I feel like you give that 2-3 races, and if you're not seeing the results, there's going to be fireworks. That's what I think.
I would agree. I would say, I would say you see what happens with the Dutch Grand Prix, and then you make more of an evaluation when you get out of Monza. Then maybe I think you can have a few data points you can observe. I'm interested to see if they do anything on the engineering side. Do they change, like, does Hugh Bird leave? Like, do they remove him and replace him with someone else? Like, what happens there? That's going to be an interesting story moving forward as to what's going on with Sergio and the folks who are working, behind the scenes to help get him up to speed. Who's helping him? What are they doing? Like, all of those things would be really interesting to know. And who knows? Maybe they'll throw us a bone and we'll get some insight into that. Jonathan Ricci asks, what does Sergio Perez need to do this weekend to help Max win his 4th Dutch Grand Prix in a row? I would say, qualifying right next to him. Like, that has to be the goal and objective, because from this point out, that's what Sergio is going to be there for, right? Is to help Max get wins, to help the team win the constructors, and to help Max consolidate that Drivers' World Championship. So for me, that's what he's got to do. Hassan Salim asks Adam, everyone is excited to see McLaren in the mix for the top crown in the constructors, but can we expect Mercedes to put up a good fight? What do you think?
They're putting up a good fight. Absolutely. They got a great car. You know what? You know where the Mercedes has the edge is Lewis Hamilton, right? They've got this guy who winning was automatic for so long that, and it's funny with Lewis is that he almost, when the car isn't good, he almost underperforms the car. But when the car is great, he overperforms the car. And that's, it's because, I think there's the obvious thing there is he gets frustrated. But, Lando has looked success in the eye and blinked a couple of times. And that does happen when you're a young-ish driver. Oscar really hasn't. When he's had opportunities, he sees them. Those two guys have got to be lights out the rest of the way. There's no more mistakes. There's no more effing around on the radio. And I think the key for McLaren here to keep Mercedes off their heels, I think the points, they're, unless something disastrous happens, like, McLaren has a double DNF and Mercedes finishes 1-2 or something like that. I don't think that they're close enough to really be a factor. I think that it's going to be Red Bull McLaren. But when I look at McLaren inside, and we talked about this over at, when Silverstone happened, Tim, and the bit of a disaster there for McLaren, stop being indecisive. You got to learn how to be a championship team, and championship teams make a decision and they go, what's the data say? Make the call, tell the driver, end of story. Don't read them War and Peace over the radio. Just go. If it's time to come in for the tires, tell them. And I think they're gonna get to that point. You do screw up along the way sometimes. Does that make sense?
Oh, definitely. I definitely agree with what you're saying. Jay Money asks, if you
J
were
Money.
a car part, if you were a car part, what car part would you be?
It's a good question. Tim, what do you think you'd be?
Engine.
Engine?
Yeah. Is that wait, I guess that's a car part. Well, it's a component. Yeah. Engine. Screw it.
I'd be the air intake because you get the best view on the track. Unless you're Logan Sargent, then you get the worst view on the track. but I would want to sit on top of where the pilot is, and I want to see everything, all the full 360.
I guess I got to kind of read the last one too. I'd feel bad if I didn't get on everybody, but Big Dan Canuck Man asks, okay, so he posts a picture in the question, and the picture is of a young Zach Brown on Wheel of Fortune. And the question is, can you validate this story? Yeah. And basically, it's the story of Zach Brown on Wheel of Fortune.
Right, which he won some money on Wheel of Fortune, invested in a go-kart, worked his way up, and now he's the CEO of McLaren Racing. Okay,
so I can't talk about this just yet because we did a thing with Zach. Like, I did a thing with Zach, and it's going to be hopefully coming out next week. Mm-hmm. And you can find all about what happens with this story there. I love that tease. I love that tease. Post that on my social media. Hopefully it'll be next week. I believe it's going to be next week. We'll have that coming out.
Yeah, you had quite the amount of people like photographing you guys when you sat down in Toronto. That was crazy.
There was like a line of like 5 people deep just taking pictures. Had to be well over 100 people there. I didn't even know because my back was to everybody.
Well, Tim, when you're used to the flashing lights like you are, the glitz, the glamour. That's just a regular day at the pool for you.
You don't take me up for a good time, buddy. Look at this. Unshaven.
Well, listen, I'm so excited to be back. It felt so good to get this out. Like, I feel like we've been pent up for weeks.
You're like, I had a lot to say.
Yeah. Well, it's nice to get out of my house too, honestly. Like, I was so sick. So man, listen, I'm real excited. What Monday we're going to talk, and hopefully we get a little rain and a little bit of drama, and we'll get back into the rest of this season. Tim, looking forward to it, man.
Buddy, thanks very much for doing this. Really appreciate it. Hope everybody enjoys the race this weekend. And yeah, we'll be back Monday.